Welcome to Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al. Today we're joined by Nathan, a farm consultant with a deep passion for practical science-backed solutions that actually work in a paddock. From a childhood spent on relatives' farms to running his own consultancy business, Nathan shares his insights on improving lamb survival, ram selection, and the importance of understanding sheep behaviour. We also talk about his journey from being terrified of public speaking to now not only presenting at major conferences, but also coaching others to become confident, engaging communicators. So let's dig in. Welcome, Nathan. Thanks for coming on Digging Deeper and sharing a bit about what you do.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I've been told that you're not actually off a farm originally, but you're now running a successful farm consultancy business. Can you just share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so all of my relatives, or a lot of my relatives, were on farm. So mum's side were dairy farmers down in the Otways, and dad's side were sheep and wheat farmers up around Horsham. So just out of succession and retirement, the farms sort of disappeared on mum's side, and then on dad's side they went to a couple of the other brothers. So dad never saw himself as being a farmer. I guess it's one of those succession stories that it mightn't affect the current generation, but sometimes it can affect the next one. Dad says he was never going to be a farmer. My answer is I would have been. But I grew up in Geelong and I just had to find my way into agriculture, basically. I spent every possible school holidays on all of the relatives' farms, and so that was milking cows, chasing sheep around. And then I started getting work in our local area on farms. So that sort of got me started and started getting a bit of experience on farm. I went through Melbourne Uni at their Dookie campus and studied applied science agriculture up there. It morphed. It took me a little while to finish my degree. I got a bit distracted with working along the way. I ended up working at Landmark doing animal health and nutrition, and then I went into farm management from there. Managed to find my way into consulting in a roundabout kind of a way.
So you went straight from Dookie into a management role?
Yeah, well, initially I had to do placement and get some work experience that meted the requirements of the course, and I ended up doing that at Landmark, and while I was there they actually offered me a job in animal health and nutrition.
Yep.
So I did that for 5 years, and then I ended up working for one of my clients managing the livestock component of their property.
Yeah, rightio. Did you end up buying a block of land yourself?
No, so we were leasing some ground for a while and running up to 1,000 sheep while also being a farm consultant.
Right.
That was pretty much born out of COVID, because during COVID I do a lot of public speaking and a lot of keynote presentations and things, and 50% of our work disappeared overnight. So rather than sitting around twiddling my thumbs, we were already leasing a little bit of ground just to keep myself sane, is what I said at the time. We kept taking on more and more ground and running more sheep, and in the end it got a bit too hectic once things started to open up. We got very hectic once things started to open back up after COVID, and I found myself trying to be too many things to too many people.
You said we. I'm assuming there's a second person involved?
Yeah, that was my wife and I involved in that. So we run pretty mixed business, I suppose you'd say. She runs a fitness and Pilates business. We've got a reformer Pilates studio at home, and so yeah, it's quite the mixed business that we run, and the kids were involved in running some sheep as well. So it was a whole family affair.
Now, your website, I was on there this morning, it says Achieve Ag Solution emphasises practical solution based on the latest science and technology. How does this actually relate in the paddock if I was to get you on my property?
Well, I think the biggest key that we're missing in all of agriculture is actually just translating that science into what it actually means on farm. And I think I've been pretty lucky in my journey to this point, becoming a consultant, in that I have been on all sides of the counter. I've sold plenty of stuff to people. I've been a farm manager, and I understand sometimes it's the trade-offs between what we think we need versus what we actually need, and it's actually finding the relevance to what we can do on farm. And I think that's just a missing link in a lot of agriculture. There's lots of great research that's being done, lots of trial results being released, but what does it really mean to the person on farm? And I guess that's what I see my crucial job is actually deciphering that, finding the really key elements in there. Ideally, the things that don't cost us money to implement. What are the things that are really going to make a difference? But doesn't mean we're spending more money. I think a lot of people expect when a consultant comes in, it's just going to be do this, do that, spend more money here. It's often not that at all. It's reallocating funds. It's finding all of those really useful 1%ers that turn into a big result.
Now, some free advice for our listeners here. Have you got something that generally works for a lot of farms, or is it very specific to individual farms?
In actual fact, most of what farms are missing is not knowledge, it's application. So I think the biggest thing is actually people slowing down and looking at what's happening within their business. We spend a lot of time running from one thing to the next, being busy, chasing efficiency, all those sorts of things, without actually slowing down and looking at what's happening. And particularly, most of the businesses I deal with are sheep operations. But within that, a lot of it is actually paying attention to what's happening in our paddocks, how our sheep behave, particularly at lambing time. I would say out of everything that we've done, the single biggest impact that we've had is on lamb survival. And most of that comes out of mob size and actually meeting energy requirements of sheep.
It's quite a common theme that's coming up the more I talk to some people, is that farmers, when times get tough, and you're from an area that's going through pretty tough dry conditions at the minute, we work harder and try and do more. But you're saying sometimes the opposite is needed, to slow down, to evaluate what's needed on farm and to implement those things.
Yeah, and it's really easy for me to sit here and say, and much harder to do. But yeah, we do tend to make ourselves busy. We get busy and we get caught up working in the business rather than on the business. And so we run into two main problems. One is that we're either working so hard and we're running from one thing to the next, and so we lose a bit of perspective, or we suffer decision paralysis. We're so worried about making the wrong decision that we make no decision at all. And making no decision is a decision.
Yeah.
And sometimes a horrible one. So I think it's trying to just see the forest for the trees, I suppose. And sometimes that just requires someone else to come on. One of my key roles over this last 6 months with my clients who are going through one of our worst seasons in 60 years is actually to give them some perspective, because all they can see is what's happening on their farm and how it is. And sometimes me coming in and saying, this is working on other farms. Sometimes it's saying, yeah, you've got it bad, but you should see what it looks like over there. Or actually, even as much as anything, it's jumping on websites like the Climate website where you can download the 60 years of data and show people that the reason it feels horrible is because it is horrible.
Yeah.
Like, this is one of the worst seasons that we've seen over our way. So I think just giving people some perspective is really important.
And I guess that a lot of kitchen table discussions with you saying, no, you're actually on the right track, takes a lot of that burden off whether they make the right decision or not, and gives them encouragement to keep going.
And like I say, most of the time it's not knowledge that they're lacking. It's often just reassurance, or it's a sounding board. It's someone else to bounce some ideas off, because the other thing is there's often 2 or 3 ideas that could be right, 2 or 3 answers that could be right. So choosing the one that we think is the best option for them, sometimes that's just having a second opinion in that decision-making process. So yeah, it's certainly, we've spent more time with our clients over the last 6 or 8 months than we normally would, which is a challenge at times for me, fitting it in. But it's just the reality of when the pressure is on, we need more time with people.
Now, are you a face-to-face person or a phone, or how do people reach out to you?
So with our one-on-one work with our clients, it's all face-to-face on farm.
Yeah.
And we've done some things via Zoom and over the phone, but the reality is when you attack it that way, you're looking through someone else's eyes, and that doesn't work. Part of the reason that we go and we have these meetings is to be a fresh set of eyes across the farm and to see things that they're not seeing. When someone's just describing it to you, you are seeing it through their eyes, and so you're still getting their filtered version of it. So it is really important to be on farm.
So you'll be picking up a lot of stuff that they're not seeing. Being there every day, fresh set of eyes, like you said, is pretty important.
And that can be both good and bad. Sometimes things aren't as bad as they feel like it is, and sometimes we'll see something that they just haven't noticed. Yep. There was a really simple example of that the other day. I was standing in a client's feedlot, and we were walking through the pens to see how lambs are going and just looking at just general animal health in there. And I noticed that as his worker was cleaning troughs, the lambs were hanging around waiting for the trough to be cleaned. And as soon as the water was let out and they'd cleaned the trough, all the lambs were rushing the troughs. It just made us aware that there was a potential issue with the water, and that they were desperate for clean water coming to the troughs. And these troughs are being cleaned daily, so it wasn't an issue with dirty water coming because the troughs weren't being cleaned.
So you test the water and...
Yeah, so we tested the water, and we actually found a significant bacterial load. So they had E. coli in that water. It's the cleanest damn water I've ever seen. So visually and to smell, it looked amazing. But and whether that was enough to change the palatability of the water for the lambs to be behaving like they were, we don't know.
Yeah.
But it certainly alerted us to a major problem that was hurting performance in the feedlot and potentially hurting animal performance across the whole farm, because it was all being fed by that one water source.
We'll go on with that theme just a little bit. What are some of the common mistakes that you see while out on farm?
I would say the biggest frustration in any farm is surprises. And so if we're talking and from a sheep production point of view, it's a surprise in condition score where they're not as good as we thought they were going to be. Rams not being quite as fit and healthy as they should be when we get to the point of joining. It's just often it's the little 1%ers, the things that just slip through the cracks because we're busy and we just haven't put our hands on the sheep for a while, or we don't inspect rams. It amazes me, and last week I was presenting at events across South Australia, and at every one of them I asked how many of the producers in the room actually get their hands on their rams, check testicles, do all of that pre-joining check, and it's a tiny percentage of people. And yet we get one chance at joining every year. We should be doing inspections of rams pre-joining every year, and hardly anyone is.
Like 6 weeks or further out?
Ideally, the only reason I would say further out is because we often need time to try and source extra rams if there is a problem. And if we are too close to joining, that becomes really hard. But obviously the semen production period is 6 weeks, so minimum 6 weeks out from joining, just so that if there is something we can have an effect, or we can at least do something about it but before it becomes a major problem for us. 10 weeks out is ideal, so that if we need to give something some antibiotics because it's had a small infection or something, we can, and then see if it has time to recover before that main semen production period.
I should have checked mine 2 weeks ago by the sounds of it.
Quite possibly.
Yeah. Do you often feed rams up to joining with the lupins or beans or something?
Yeah, so lupins definitely give us better semen production. And so when we can get lupins, and generally for most farms you're only talking a ton of lupins to be able to do the whole ram team. So it's not a major cost or issue for us. It's cheap insurance. It's certainly not the be-all and end-all. I'd much rather have good, fit, healthy rams that are all walking on good feet and have been inspected properly I'd rather that than chasing our tail by feeding a heap of lupins to get them up. But yeah, in an ideal world, you'd feed lupins in the lead up to joining for 6 weeks and also have them well and truly inspected and make sure everyone's fit and healthy.
Yep. All right, we'll keep on going on with the ram selections. You speak a lot about the science and technology. How do you approach your topic like ram selection? Do you use ASPVs?
Yeah, so we do use ASPVs, and this is one of my great frustrations as an industry is actually the fact that it's even an argument. I think the industry got highly sidetracked by agendas, and it should never have been an argument about figures versus visual. It should be always both. We can't have a ram with amazing figures who can't walk and do his job and has got terrible feet. And similarly, ASPVs give us our best possible prediction of the performance of the progeny. Yeah. So we'd be mad not to use both. I just think the industry got sidetracked by people with some form of agenda, and it ended up being an us versus them when it absolutely didn't need to be. For the everyday producer out there, we should be using both. They're both fantastic tools. That's the way we should be approaching it.
So you'll select a team on genotype, go into the pen, and then pick out of those selection of rams on what you want in your flock? Yeah,
so generally if we've got a sale coming up, I will try and narrow that sale team down based on figures before we get there. I do as much homework as I can before sale day. We'll download the catalogue, sort it all up. I will generally go into a sale I'll categorise them into A's, B's and C's so that I've got a bit of price guide in there as to who I'm willing to spend more money on than the others. And then we go through and we'll visually inspect every single ram, check them for feet, shape, all those sorts of things, and take animals out of that list.
Yeah.
So ideally, if I'm trying to buy 10 rams, I like to have a list of, say, 30 or 40 that meet my criteria. And within that 30 or 40, they'll be broken down into A's, B's and C's so that I get a bit of an idea of how much money I want to spend.
Yep. And there's some F's in there you just won't look at.
There's a whole lot of them in there that I won't look at. I either won't look at them on figures, so if their figures aren't right, I will not even look at that ram on sale day.
Yeah.
I'll just walk straight past him. If he doesn't meet my needs with figures, then I won't look at him. Similarly, I don't care how good his figures are. If his feet aren't good enough underneath him or he's not a style of animal that I like, then the figures don't mean anything to me either. We just walk past him.
Yeah, and what figures are you focused on a regular basis? What are you looking for?
So it depends on what breed of ram we're looking at, but are
you a composite client base down there?
We've actually got the full spectrum. So we go from superfine merinos through to shedding sheep. We've got a bit of everything in between. But still a major focus. So for those, if we start with terminal sires, an absolute roadblock for me is birth weight. If birth weight's too high, I don't care what the rest of the figures are. We won't touch him. It causes us too many issues. So birth weight is an immediate stop-go sort of one for us. Then we would look at growth, fat and muscle as being the major traits for us on a terminal sire. If we jump into merinos at the other end of the spectrum, then it's predominantly looking at, well, we're still chasing growth, fat and muscle because they're traits that are really critical for us getting an animal that's actually going to perform. And we know how important condition score is. I want an animal that does a lot of that itself without having to jam a heap of feed down its neck. So really good maternal traits. We will obviously then start looking at other things like, so if it's merinos, we'll be looking at micron and fleece weight because they're obviously key profit drivers for us. We also look at worm egg count across any of the types of breed that we're looking at. The less drenching we can do, the better off we're going to be. So chasing that and then into the fertility traits. I spend a bit less time on the fertility traits. My general feeling is that we've got plenty of fertility in sheep in Australia.
It's more of management.
It's a management issue.
Yeah.
So ideally, we'd still chase fertility traits. But if I have to compromise on one, then I'm more likely to compromise on a fertility trait if I can get everything else right in the
and be able to make it up.
Yep. And that's I suppose it's because fertility is one of our least heritable, but if we do really want to have an impact on fertility, we need to directly select for it. So if someone really wants to chase fertility, then go after those ASPVs that will allow you to directly select for fertility.
Let's now have a think about those practical things we can do as producers. The rams are about to go out. What are you focusing on to increase lamb survival and lamb numbers? So
I'm pretty blunt on this one, but if you're not scanning for multiples, then we're not really trying. The whole reason for that is the minute we get a ewe to conceive with twins, or triplets for that matter, the minute she conceives with multiples, she's an entirely different animal. If I could get her to look like a cow, my life as a consultant would be a lot better because people would treat them as two separate animals. The fact that they all still look like sheep, singles and twins, actually, it's the distraction that we just don't need. Her energy requirements increase so much through late pregnancy and into lactation that she needs to be treated very differently to look after her and to give us our best chance at getting good lamb survival. So first step absolutely is scanning, and then scanning also gives us immediate feedback on everything we want to know about how our joining went. So if we've got a high dry percentage, I want to start piecing together, is it because the ewes weren't travelling as well as they should have been, or did we have a ram issue? And we can usually unpack that just simply off the numbers. So if we've got a high dry percentage, but our twin single ratio is how we would expect it to be, that tells me that the ewes were travelling okay because we end up with enough twins in those who did get pregnant, but perhaps there was an issue with the rams. And sometimes that's not a disease issue like brucellosis or anything like that in the rams. More recently, we've seen issues where people just haven't had the rams in the same paddock, which sounds ridiculous.
As in they've got out, or
they've either gone through fences, or particularly people in a mixed farming operation where they might have a whole lot of stubbles with gates open and they've got sheep out on stubbles at joining.
Yeah,
rams will hang on one water point. Ewes are travelling into different paddocks through open gateways, and you can find that just the ewe's not available to the ram for that long while she's cycling. So 24 hours in a mature ewe, she happens to be on the wrong side of the fence for 24 hours.
So have you got any clients that are joining containment at the minute?
Yeah, we got quite a few that'll be joining containment just because of seasonal conditions.
Our ram power goes down significantly because of that very fact that it's close by, or
they're close by. So we can get some. So the ram you contact is exceptional during containment. It actually works really well to join in containment. So we can get away with a lot more while in terms of joining percentages. I still would say we get one crack at this every year. So let's not skimp on rams. They're actually one of the cheapest parts of our whole production system.
Yeah.
So the cost per lamb side, if you ever sit down and do the maths, is actually really quite cheap. So spend money on rams, have enough in there because we get one crack at it every year. Some
listener questions, and one of them actually follows on from this conversation nicely. The lamb loss mystery. So where are the lambs disappearing? So sometimes scanning percentages are quite good, but then we get to marking percentages and we're surprised sometimes 30-40% reduction in fetuses scanned. Is it a scanning issue? Is it losing lambs in utero? Where do you believe we're losing them along the way?
All right, so this one is, there's a couple of caveats I'll put on this. If you've got a really good scanner who we're really confident in their accuracy, then generally we will only lose about 3% of fetuses in that last trimester.
Right.
So from scanning on. So it's a tiny percentage compared to the overall number that we will lose between scanning and marking.
Yeah.
So they're not happening in utero unless we have a major disease issue with either Campylobacter, Listeria or toxoplasmosis. So if we have one of those disease issues...
What rates can they be lost up to?
So you can lose up to 30% of fetuses in what we would call an abortion storm, which is a horrible term for it. But when we get those really significant losses from one of those three diseases, you will generally see staining around the back end of ewes.
So we'll actually notice signs of that actually happening.
If you're paying attention, you will notice it.
Yep.
So the challenge there is an aborted fetus is a bit like dropping your phone out in the paddock. Unless you can ring it, your chances of finding it are pretty slim. So being able to find fetuses in the paddock are unlikely. If you ever do find one in the paddock, then I highly recommend you get it tested just to see what the potential cause of that abortion might be. Because, as I say, we don't find them very easily. But the majority of what we lose between scanning and marking is happening post-birth and in that first 24 to 72 hours. And that, unfortunately, comes down to us and our management. That's where we've got to put the work in to try and keep those lambs alive. So there's a whole range of things that contribute to their loss. If we've got birth weight issues, we have a really critical window that we're aiming for, which is around that 4.5 to 5.5 kilos at birth weight.
Yeah. Are we seeing many lambs underweight?
A lot of lambs underweight.
And is that lack of nutrition for the ewe? So
it can be genetics, combination of genetics and nutrition in late pregnancy, and condition score of the ewe as well. The easiest way, and I get asked this, why are my lambs dying? The simplest answer is buy yourself a set of luggage scales. Every lamb you come in contact with at lambing, you pick it up and you weigh it. So if you find a dead lamb, I don't want you running around your paddocks causing other issues, but if you're in your lambing paddock and you see a dead lamb, pick it up and weigh it. If you have to pull a lamb, pick it up and weigh it, and you'll quickly find that the majority of what you're picking up are either underweight, the majority of what you're pulling and having to assist with are over that 5.5 kilos. And so we can start to build a picture for what's happening in our lambing paddocks. This is, again, why it's so important for us to have our twins and singles separate. We're much more likely to blow a single up and end up with it overweight and have that high birth weight lamb that can suffer from a traumatic birth. In our twins, we're much more likely to underfeed them, end up with a lot of 3.5, 4 kilo lambs.
So bottom weight, what's your top weight you're looking for roughly?
So in that, our ideal range is 4.5 to 5.5 kilos. Yeah. So it's only a 1 kilo range, which is tiny in the grand scheme of things. Yeah. But that's where our best survival comes from. And if you want to put it into a really simple context, if I have a piece of paper and a house brick and I heat them up in front of the fire inside, and then we take them out into the cold night air, your piece of paper cools down straight away because it's got this big surface area, not enough volume, and so it just can't retain its own heat, whereas your house brick retains its heat. The piece of paper are those lambs that are under 4.5 kilos.
Yeah.
They've just got all this skin and they just can't retain their own body heat.
A bit more thermal mass amongst the slightly heavier ones.
Yeah. So again, it's a case of putting your effort and your emphasis on your twins because the singles are relatively bulletproof. So we can afford to give less attention to the singles and all of our efforts into our twins to help keep them alive. And then the other factor in all of that is actually having the mob sizes as small as we possibly can.
Yep. Now I've had a few discussions with people, mob sizes versus physical space.
Yeah. So
is there a correlation?
It's all about mob size.
Really?
Not physical space.
Yeah.
So the problem is if we take a mob of lambing ewes and we stick them in say it's a 100 hectare paddock, they'll still sit together in one corner of the paddock.
Yeah.
They don't spread out and use the paddock effectively. Occasionally we get certain paddocks where that does happen and it works well for us, but the majority of the time they still travel as a mob. They're a mob animal. So this is why mob size is so important to us. If, as a ewe goes into her active labour, or about an hour before she starts going into labour herself, her hormones kick in and she starts looking for the smell of afterbirth.
Yeah.
It's a really, really clever system that nature has developed so that as soon as she drops her lamb, her system's already pinging, she starts cleaning it.
Yeah.
Works brilliantly for singles. Ewe drops the lamb, turns around and cleans it. No one gets a chance to do anything. But in our twin paddocks, or in any lambing paddock actually, before that ewe goes into her own active labour, she starts looking for the smell of afterbirth. She'll walk that whole paddock looking for it. It's the desire for that afterbirth is so strong, she will walk the whole paddock and she'll visit everyone's birth sites. So the challenge in a twin or triplet bearing ewe is she drops her first lamb, and while she goes to have her second lamb, another ewe who's looking for the smell of afterbirth can come and start trying to clean lambs.
Yeah.
And it just causes confusion on the birth site.
She'll drop that one off once she starts lambing herself.
She will push that lamb away and she won't accept it. And then we've got these perfectly healthy lambs that are in that ideal slot, 4.5 to 5.5 kilos. So they had everything going for them, but they've just got no one feeding them. If we ever do lamb autopsies, you'll weigh them, everything looks fine. There's no physical signs of anything. You open up their stomach and they haven't been fed.
Yeah.
And it's just driven by that mismothering. So when someone says to me, what's the ideal twin mob size? My answer is 1. Anything bigger than that is a compromise. So clearly we've got to find the practicality. For most of my clients, that practicality sits somewhere between 70 and 100 for twins. Your singles, I don't care how big your mob size is. It's only driven by stocking rate. But twins, we're just trying to get those mob sizes as small as we can. And the better you're joining, so the tighter you're joining, the smaller your mob size needs to be. And if you start scanning for early and late, so that we've only got one cycle, that means our mob size needs to be even smaller because we've got everything dropping on a certain given number of days.
So if we are starting to tighten up that lambing window, we've actually got to look at make sure we've got enough paddock space. Or enough paddocks, I should say.
Paddocks. And we're generally creating that with hot wires. If you had asked me 10 years ago about hot wires with sheep, I wasn't a big fan of the idea at all. But heavily pregnant ewes don't take on a hot wire that much.
No.
And if we got heat in it on day one when that hot wire's set up, so we're just using two hot wires generally, just gives us the ability to split paddocks down.
Normally a bit more moisture around in lambing time too, so they'll feel it a bit further out from the fence, which is a good thing.
And they're not chasing heaps of water either. So we'll often put water available in the paddock, but you'll find they're hardly drinking it at all, if at all. And that's because they're eating lush green feed.
Yeah.
A tight season like we've just gone through over our way, that makes it more difficult. We have to make water available. But in a normal, wet, lush sort of lambing season,
we've only 12% dry matter in the pasture. There's plenty of water amongst it. So
they're literally eating 30 litres of water a day.
Yeah. What about udder scores and do you look at their udders much? Yeah,
so in an ideal world, we would have every sheep producer going through their ewes at marking to check for wet and dry so that we know who has actually successfully lambed and who's lost.
Yeah.
Because those ewes who lamb and lose are a cost to our system. Yeah. But also just checking for udders. So bottle teats can be a major problem. It can just simply be issues with udders. So some of them are, if we've got proper mastitis issues, that's a major issue. Sometimes it's just...
You would recommend culling? If they've had it once, they're out, they've got to go.
Yep. Yeah. And if we've got big bottle teats, so she might successfully conceive every year, but her teats are too big for a lamb to ever get its mouth around. She's never going to rear lambs, and we just keep treating her and feeding her and doing all the things, treating her like a twin bearing ewe, and every year she loses her lambs because of the udder structure. So it's one of those ones that we just need to get onto. Some people do it at marking, some do it at weaning, but just having some focus on actually checking for those that have lambed and lost, but also just any udder issues.
Yeah, and then what are some other considerations to lamb survival? We've actually birthed the lamb well, they've joined up, she's had a feed.
Yep, so beyond that...
Once we get to that stage, we're right?
There's probably one step in the middle of all that, which is around that whole giving her the time and space to actually mother up. So we need the ewe on her birth site uninterrupted for 6 hours. And one of the biggest challenges to that is actually us. We love to drive around and check lambing ewes. And it's a challenge I'm putting out to certainly all of my clients is, why are we checking ewes? Is it for her or is it for us? And a lot of the time it makes us feel better.
Sleep better at night.
When the reality is, every time we drive into a lambing paddock, the ewes will react to us. And they will move, even if it's only by a few metres, they will move off their birth sites. And that increases our risk of mismothering. And so if we need to check, then it's least possible disturbance. Go and buy yourself the best set of binoculars you can afford. Find yourself the spots around your farm where you can stop, look across paddocks. If you can see a problem, then yes, we'll go and rectify that issue. If we can't see any problems, we don't need to be driving around every single lambing paddock just in case there's an issue. We seem to go with mass disruption in case there's an issue, when it should really be, let's start, and if we start seeing some issues, then we ramp it up to eventually getting to checking every day.
I still remember my first lambing season, and I reckon I caused the most amount of trouble in the district by doing what I thought was the right thing. Just this year, actually, we started using a cheap little drone. Well, it wasn't that cheap, but a little drone sitting on the top of the shearing shed and checking lambs. And if they were sitting down, we would just drop the drone down a little bit. And if she got up and had a look around and there was a lamb there, we went back up and disappeared, sort of thing.
Yep.
We bought a bunch of trade sheep in as well that year, so they didn't know us very well either. So that was actually pretty successful in the end.
Yeah, we've got a couple of people using drones, particularly for areas of the farm that are difficult to get a line of vision across. About 10 years ago, I bought a drone because I thought this was going to be a brilliant tool for checking lambing ewes. The drones have improved a lot in 10 years. I flew mine over a client's lambing ewes, and the camera meant it wasn't a great camera on it, and it meant that we had to fly at a fairly low altitude.
Yeah.
And it frightened the hell out of the sheep, and the sheep took off in every direction. I flew it home, put it back in the ute, and drove home and didn't ever spoke about it again.
Well, we actually use them to get them out of the creek paddock we can't drive in, because when you move them around, they make a horrible sound. The sheep don't like them, but if you sit far enough away from it, they're not too bothered by it. But with these modern drones, so
yeah, and that's a big change. Is that the cameras now on them are so good, you don't need to be flying at a low altitude.
Yeah.
So you can stay up pretty high, and which keeps you up above the trees, because that's obviously the other risk of flying a drone around. Is we did have one client put his fairly expensive drone into a red gum, which is not ideal, but he has found it to be a really useful tool for checking lambing ewes.
And don't fly back upwind. Just remember that it's a lot slower, and we ran out of batteries a few times. So another question we've got actually from a old alumni that you know, Rowan Paulette. I was talking to him this morning, and he said your take on super intensive sheep farming practices. So things like 6 monthly shearing or the intensive 17-day joining, with all that extra work and management, do the numbers stack up at the end of the day?
Really good question. I think it depends significantly on the individual farm and the individual farm manager, in all reality. My standard answer to most things in terms of whether the numbers stack up is if you do anything really well, then you end up making pretty good money. It's the same as all the benchmarking data that shows there's less variation between the top 25% of any of the, whether you're a beef farmer or a prime lamb producer or a wool producer, there's less variation between all of those top 25 producers than there is between the best and the worst within each category.
Yeah.
I think you do anything well and you're probably going to be quite profitable. That's as a generalisation. In terms of how intensively we go, we had one client in composites that was going 6 monthly shearing, and it worked brilliantly in terms of animal management, but the costs are just too significant now. The cost of shearing means that it's not sustainable to be doing it when you're not getting a wool check. We've got some merino clients that are on 6 monthly shearing, some that are pushing towards 6 monthly shearing, and it works really well from a wool clip preparation point of view, works really well in terms of managing the animal, but again, cost becomes an issue, and we are trying to drag costs down across all enterprises at the moment, because everything that's, if we just refer to the post-COVID period, cost creep has happened significantly, where everything is costing us so much more now than what it was. So I'm very conscious of some of those, that intensivity just drags costs right up, and we've got to be very careful of that.
I'm assuming there'll be bigger room for error. The higher intensity you go, one little mistake in systems like that could be quite significant. Yeah,
and I suppose sometimes we hedge our bets. So if we take the 17-day joining type strategy, we've got a couple of clients, because they're a composite client and they're also joining ewe lambs. We've always joined the ewe lambs later than the mature ewes, just to get those ewe lambs a little bit older. And in this scenario, we've managed to come up with a joining strategy that means they join mature ewes for 17 days, rams come out, and then the ewe lambs and all of the mature ewes get joined at the same time for 5 weeks again. So it actually gives the mature ewes 8 weeks, effectively, access to rams. There's just a gap in between. But it means that if everything's going well, which a couple of our clients have played with this now for a few years, and they're getting up to 90% joined on that first cycle. So we've only got 10% of ewes who are actually mature ewes who are joined on that second joining. And we can make a call whether we want to even keep them at all. So if we keep them, they're lambing at the same time as the ewe lambs. It doesn't have a major effect on us. They're just there and they just fit into the system. Or we decide we actually just don't want them at all. If we can get it down to 10% and we've got enough and we're getting big marking percentages, so we've got enough replacements coming through and things, then we sometimes will decide to quit them, especially in a tough year.
And so those ewe lambs only getting a 5-week joining that second time the rams go out.
Yeah.
We've always put out a few older ewes in with the maidens to both lamb and also to join up. Is there much data saying that's a necessary step, or is it a conscious step for me? My recommendation is not to do it when they're lambing. The only reason for that is, well, actually, for joining and for lambing, I prefer not to have maidens in with mature ewes. So if we take joining, we'll start with joining, the mature ewes will seek the rams out. Yeah. When they're cycling, they will actively go and they will huddle around the rams and basically try and get the rams' attention, while the maidens walk the paddock oblivious to what's going on. Right.
And so if we've got maidens in the paddock with mature ewes, the mature ewes can be a distraction for the rams, and they just don't do enough work to go and find those maidens that are cycling. Right. If we're talking at lambing, because our mothering instincts in the maidens aren't as strong as what they are in the mature ewes are much more likely to try and poach lambs. So like that we talked about earlier, that real desire for the smell of afterbirth, those mature ewes will steal a lot of lambs and potentially cause quite a lot of confusion on birth sites with a maiden who just doesn't have that same level of natural instinct. So keeping our maidens separate is my standard recommendation.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to be changing some things this time around, so thank you for that. Now you're actually in the area for the Gippsland Red Meat Conference. Can you give us a little bit of a insight to what you spoke about at that conference?
Yeah, so a lot of it is actually, we've covered quite a few of the topics, because what I wanted to do at this conference is give people some of the really simple things that they can go and do tomorrow. When we go to a conference, we often hear lots of things that are going to come to us in the future. I always like to make sure we've got plenty of things we can take home and implement tomorrow. So a lot around lamb survival. A lot of it is just actually understanding sheep. A big theme of my presentation is the idea of slowing down and understanding why sheep do what they do.
Yeah, the title of your session is actually Are Sheep Really Dumb? Is that correct?
Essentially, yes. It's that sheep aren't stupid, they're just a bit misunderstood, and that's the major theme. So even if we just think about, we can have the most perfectly sheltered lambing paddock, and a ewe will go and lamb out on the point of the hill. There might only be a small rise in the paddock, but she'll always go to that point. And we can often look at a sheep and think that she's dumb. Why is she out there? We've got all this shelter she could be using. But there's a scientific reason for it. She's a prey animal, and out there gives her best vantage point. So she can see
the high ground. Yeah,
she can see where a predator's going to come from, and predators come from shelter. So the role of the shelter is to drop the wind speed across the whole paddock. So when she goes to that point that gives her the best visual, she's still more sheltered than she would have been. But we can't hold it against her when she goes out to that really exposed point, because that's her natural instinct. So we look at her and think, oh, you silly thing, what are you out there for? It's actually very, very clever for her to be out there. So again, we would say sheep are stupid. They're not stupid, they just don't always do what we want them to do. And a lot of it is based on the fact that they're a prey animal and they've got a lot of survival instincts. It's a bit like at lambing, I see people driving around with dogs on the back of their ute or on the back of the bike. And again, we're dealing with a prey animal, and we're taking a predator into the paddock.
Yeah.
We spend 11 months of the year trying to get sheep to run away from a dog, and then we expect in a lambing paddock, where we need them to stay on their birth site for 6 hours uninterrupted, we expect them not to react when we take a dog into the paddock.
Yeah.
It's one of those ones where we just need to slow down a bit and just think about why sheep do what they do, and start questioning why we do the things we do.
All right. Well, I think you're going to agree with me for once with one of my practices. I actually change cars and don't take a dog around lambing, so it's always a different car than we normally take. And we found that works well because that very reason, normally we're chasing sheep.
Yeah.
Whereas they can get quite used to, it's more my wife's car actually, just pottering through there, and they know they're not going to get chased.
Yeah.
And they're quite relaxed actually. So
yeah, which is perfect. And we saw it on a farm where there was a change of management. So one manager had always moved sheep with the bike and checked sheep and fed sheep with the ute, and then they had a change of management, and the next person loved to check sheep on a bike and move sheep with the ute, because he could have all of his dogs on the back of the ute.
Oh, yeah.
And so what happened was, the first time he went to go and check lambing ewes on the bike, they'd been conditioned for 10 years to run away from a bike. The minute they heard the bike, they start moving. So he went to go into lambing paddocks, and sheep just hit the other side of the paddock instantly and caused all this mismothering. So it is a serious thing. Just slow down and think about the vehicles we're using, how we've spent the last 11 months conditioning sheep, and then expect them to not react when we go into the paddock. It's really, when you stop and think about it, maybe it's not the sheep that are stupid.
We miss a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
Now, this next topic we're going to talk on, it's actually something that is feared more than death by some people, but you actually have a passion for public speaking. You also do a bit of coaching in that.
I do.
Can you share a little bit about that?
So I was one of the people that was terrified of public speaking.
Right.
When I was at uni, there was nothing that scared me more than public speaking. I would have jumped out of an aeroplane rather than have to stand in front of even half a dozen people. It was terrifying to me. And because of work, even when I was farm managing, I got asked, because I was part of the Grain and Graze program, we were involved in a couple of different projects, and I got asked to speak at an event, and it went okay. People enjoyed the information that I shared, and I sort of somehow got a bit more used to it. And then obviously when I moved into consulting, all of a sudden there was a need to be standing in front of audiences more often.
Yeah.
And I quickly realised that what actually started at uni, we did some mock interviews at uni where we had to sit opposite 3 industry people and do a mock job interview. And at the end of it, they said to me that my body language was really good, I was really engaged, I looked really confident. And I wondered what the hell they'd been watching, because that was not what was going on inside my body.
Duck on water, were you?
Yeah, it was a life-changing moment for me, because I realised that what people see on the outside doesn't have to be what's going on the inside. Because on the inside, I was terrified. And as I've progressively found ways, and whenever I'm running the presentation training, I tell people I've found ways to cheat. And that's all it is. We're all trying to cheat. It doesn't matter how many people or how many performances you've done. All the time we are trying to find ways to look more confident than we really are and to come across incredibly professional, relaxed, all of those things. And so that's what we coach people into, how to deal with our nerves, because we all get nervous. Last week I was presenting at the Australian Dairy Conference, so we're on a big stage, lights, 650 people in the room. Of course you're going to get nervous.
Yeah.
And my actual answer is if you don't get nervous, you don't care enough. So we should expect to get nervous. It's just turning that nervous energy into something positive. So making sure...
And not debilitating.
And not debilitating, yeah. And making sure that we can get out there and we can actually feed off that energy, that nervous energy, and you can share that energy with the audience in a positive way. And then you get the adrenaline rush, which is now essentially what I'm addicted to.
Yeah, right.
Is you get the rush. When you deliver a really good presentation, people really enjoy it. You get that feedback from people that they've really enjoyed it. It becomes an adrenaline rush, and you literally do become addicted to it. So I just love helping people overcome that fear, because in everyday life, whether it's work or not, you are going to find yourself having to make a speech at some stage, whether it's at a wedding, at a 21st, at a funeral. It's just a life skill that we can all find ways to do better. And I think one of our challenges in agriculture is that we often just deliver information in exactly the same way it's always been delivered. And I like to challenge the industry to find some ways to be a bit more creative in how we go about that.
And I think that's a key point as well, with public relations not always the best between ag and a lot of our community. Playing our part as producers is a really important part to keeping the industry going and in a positive light.
Yeah, and a lot of... So the link between that and what we just talked about with public speaking is we are storytellers.
Yeah.
Like every time we step onto a stage, every time we talk to one of our consumers, we are a storyteller. And just being proficient at telling stories goes a long way to actually building trust and engaging properly with people, getting people to believe the messages we're putting out there. And so a lot of it is actually just being prepared to tell our story. Not in a really cringy sort of... It worries me a bit that sometimes I don't even particularly like the word advocate that people use. I think just tell our story truthfully. Actually make sure that our backyard is clean enough. One thing that people say is we need to show people where their food comes from. The worry is that we've got to make sure that our backyard is clean and we can absolutely put our hand on our heart and say, this is what we believe in. This is why we are the best in the world. And in all industries, there are things that we're still working on. Be honest about it. We haven't got this right. We're working on it. We realise it's a problem. We're doing everything we can to solve that problem. But show the general consumer, and we're not talking about here the vegan extremists. This is a conversation with the people who love to eat and wear our product. Let's have real conversations with them and actually show them that we care, not just by saying that we care, actually showing them, demonstrating with actual practical evidence to say, we realise this is an issue, we're doing everything we can to overcome it.
I think there's really a whole lot of untapped potential there too, and it's nice that you said it's a skill, public speaking, because I used to be a teacher, school teacher, and when I left teaching to get into the industry with my grandfather, the thing I loved most was actually talking to farmers. They got some really, really good stories and they tell them really well. But you say, go tell it on a stage, and they say there's no way. But using your skills and teaching them some skills is actually probably a really positive way to get that message across.
Well, and there is no better person to tell the story than coming from the horse's mouth, actually having the farmers tell their story. And sometimes we need to help them with that. So that's where panel sessions can be great. Last week, I hosted 2 panel sessions at the Australian Dairy Conference because it's an opportunity to get farmers on the stage. So we had 5 different farming businesses on the stage across 2 different panel sessions so that the audience could hear directly from other farmers. But if you were to ask them to get up there and just do a presentation, there's not a chance in hell that they would do that. But in a safe environment where we can get up there and have a conversation, a bit like this here with the podcast, it's a safe place for someone to share their story. I think we can get a lot more of that happening across the industry.
And so you're just steering them through that conversation. They feel comfortable, like they're just chatting to you almost, rather than the crowd of hundreds in front of them. And
that's the exact aim, is to feel like it's a conversation just between us rather than them paying too much attention to the 600 plus people sitting out there in the audience. That's easier said than done. There's absolutely still a fair rush of nerves that was going through them at the time. But yeah, the aim is that we do it in a safe way so that they can share their story.
I really appreciated hearing from you this afternoon. We're actually going to finish on one last question, our signature question. We're always learning, but what I want to know is, what have you learnt recently that has actually surprised you?
I'm actually going to refer back to the Australian Dairy Conference again, because we had Lee Sales from the ABC as one of the guest speakers there. And she's written a book, and it refers back to this whole public speaking and nerves thing. And what she talked about was enough to make me want to go and buy her book and understand, because it's all about storytelling.
Have you?
I haven't yet. I tried to buy it at the airport on my way out, and they didn't have it. They'd sold out. So that might say something for how it's going. But what she talked about was, again, that whole area of nerves. And one of the stories she shared was that it was about Carl Stefanovic from the Today Show, and how they've had to be careful with wardrobe and what he wears because he sweats so much with his nervousness. Now, Carl comes across as one of the most relaxed, confident, bordering on arrogant sort of people in terms of just that level of confidence. And yet he suffers from all the same nerves as everyone else. I just think it's that great reminder. We all look at other people and think that they're bulletproof and that they're the ones that have it all together and they know how to deal with nerves and all those things. And the reality is we're all the same. Some of us are just better at covering it up and perhaps looking more confident than we really are.
And just like running for a lot of athletes, it's just a skill that we learn. And the more we practice it, obviously, the better we get it. And we never would have guessed that you were a nervous wreck up on stage. I've seen you speak, and very, very engaging and seemingly very relaxed up there as well. So thanks very much for coming in.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.